Have you ever seen someone struggle in silence, their pain hidden behind a brave face, while the world around them keeps moving without a care? At Willow Creek Academy, a private school where the hallways gleamed with polished marble and the air smelled of money, a boy named Noah Carver walked alone. His walker clicked against the floor, each step a small battle against his cerebral palsy. His shoulders hunched slightly, his brown eyes scanning the ground, avoiding the stares of students who whispered as he passed. Their words, sharp and quiet, cut through the hum of the bustling halls. Noah's thin frame moved slowly, his hands gripping the walker's handles, knuckles pale from the effort. He didn't respond to the murmurs, didn't look up, but his jaw tightened with every step. Lila Brooks, 30 and tough as nails, watched from the cafeteria counter. Her green apron hung loose over her white shirt, her dark hair pulled into a messy braid that swayed as she wiped down trays. She worked as a waitress at the academy to pay for her daughter Mia's medical bills, her shifts long and her nights longer. Lila's eyes, sharp and knowing, caught Noah's slow trek across the cafeteria. He was a regular sight, always alone, his tray wobbling as he balanced it on his walker. She'd seen him before, noticed the way he kept his head down, the way his lips pressed together when kids snickered. Something about his quiet strength tugged at her. She knew what it was like to fight battles nobody else saw. The cafeteria was alive with noise, forks clinking, kids laughing, the faint hum of pop music from someone's phone. The room's high windows let in streams of sunlight, making the polished tables shine. Noah found his usual spot, a small table in the corner, far from the clusters of students who filled the room with chatter. He eased himself into a chair, his walker parked beside him, and opened his lunch, a sandwich and an apple, simple and neat. Lila watched as he took a small bite, his eyes fixed on the table. She felt a pang in her chest. Her own daughter, Mia, was only a few years younger, and the thought of her eating alone like this made Lila's stomach twist. Across the room, two boys stood out in the crowd. Tyson Reed and Gavin Holt, both tall for their age, leaned against a table surrounded by a small group of kids. Their expensive sneakers and cocky grins marked them as the kind who owned any room they walked into. Tyson's blonde hair fell into his eyes as he nudged Gavin, pointing toward Noah. Gavin smirked, his voice carrying just enough for Lila to catch. "Look at him, man. Thinks he's one of us." The words weren't loud, but they were sharp, like a blade slipped under the skin. A few kids nearby chuckled, their eyes darting to Noah, who kept his head down, pretending not to hear. Lila's grip tightened on the rag she held. She'd seen this before, kids like Tyson and Gavin picking on someone who couldn't fight back. It wasn't new, but it never got easier to watch. She glanced at the other cafeteria workers, busy with their tasks, and then back at Noah. His fingers fumbled with the apple, rolling it slowly on the table. She wanted to walk over, say something, anything, but she hesitated. She was just a waitress, not a teacher. Getting involved could cost her this job, and Mia needed her to keep it. Still, her feet itched to move, her hands curling into fists beneath the counter. Tyson and Gavin moved closer to Noah's table, their steps casual but deliberate. The crowd around them grew, kids sensing something was about to happen. Tyson leaned down, his voice louder now, dripping with mock curiosity. "Hey, Noah, what's with the robot legs? You training for the slow-motion Olympics?" Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Gavin joined in, picking up Noah's apple and tossing it between his hands. "Bet he can't even catch this," he said, grinning as he held it just out of Noah's reach. Noah's face flushed, his eyes flicking up for a moment before dropping back to his tray. He didn't say a word, but his hands trembled slightly on the walker's handles. Lila's heart pounded. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, her pulse quickening as she watched the boys circle Noah like wolves. She knew that look, the way Tyson's eyes gleamed with cruel confidence, the way Gavin fed off the crowd's laughter. She'd seen it in the real world too, in the men who tried to push her around before she learned self-defense. Her training kicked in instinctively, her muscles tensing, but she forced herself to stay put. Not yet, she thought. She needed to be sure, needed to know this wasn't just kids being kids. But the sight of Noah, small and alone, his shoulders curling inward, made her chest ache. The cafeteria's noise seemed to fade for Lila, the clatter of trays and chatter blurring into the background. She focused on Noah, on the way his fingers gripped his sandwich, crumbs falling as he tried to ignore the taunts. Tyson leaned closer, his voice dropping to a fake whisper that carried across the room. Bet his dad bought him that walker with his billions. Too bad money can't buy you a spine. The words hit like a punch. A few kids gasped, others laughed louder, and a girl named Sophie, sitting nearby, shook her head but didn't speak up. Noah's face burned red, his eyes fixed on the table, but he didn't move. Lila's jaw clenched so hard her teeth hurt. She knew about Noah's dad, Elliot Carver, the tech CEO whose name was on half the buildings in town. She also knew Noah's mom had died years ago, leaving him and his dad to navigate their grief alone. Gavin tossed the apple again, this time letting it roll across the table, just out of Noah's reach. "Oops," he said, his voice thick with fake apology. The crowd's laughter grew, a wave of sound that filled the shining cafeteria. Noah reached for the apple, his arm shaking slightly, but Tyson snatched it up first, holding it high. "Come on, man, you gotta try harder than that," Tyson said, his grin wide and mean. The other kids egged him on, their voices blending into a cruel hum. Lila's hands shook as she set down her rag. She glanced at the clock, 10 minutes left in her shift. She could walk away, let the teachers handle it, but something in Noah's eyes stopped her. They weren't just sad, they were tired, like he'd been carrying this weight for too long. She took a step forward, then stopped. Mrs. Harper, the principal, was nowhere in sight, probably in her office across campus. The other cafeteria workers were busy, their heads down, ignoring the scene. Lila's mind raced. She thought of Mia, of the hospital bills stacked on her kitchen table, of the life she was scraping together for them. But then she looked at Noah, his small frame hunched over the table, his walker glinting under the cafeteria lights. Tyson leaned in again, his voice louder now, cutting through the noise. "What's wrong, Noah? You gonna cry to Daddy?" "Oh, wait, he's too busy making money to care." The laughter swelled, and Gavin grabbed Noah's tray, tipping it slightly, letting the sandwich slide toward the edge. Lila's heart thundered. She couldn't just stand there anymore. Her feet moved before her mind caught up, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She didn't know what she'd say or do, but she knew she couldn't let this go on. Noah's eyes flicked up, meeting hers for a split second, and in that moment, she saw something raw, hope, fear, and a quiet plea for help. The bullies' voices grew louder, their taunts sharper, the crowd's laughter a roaring tide. Tyson held the tray now, waving it like a trophy, and Gavin gave Noah's walker a nudge, making it wobble. Noah Carver sat at his corner table, his hands gripping the edge, his walker wobbling from Gavin's nudge. His face was pale, his brown eyes locked on the table as if he could disappear into it. Tyson held Noah's tray high, the sandwich sliding to the floor with a soft thud, crumbs scattering across the shiny tiles. Gavin laughed, a loud, barking sound, and tossed Noah's apple into the air again, catching it with a smug grin. The crowd of students around them grew louder, their phones out, recording every moment. Lila Brooks stood frozen near the counter, her green apron wrinkled from her clenched fists, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Tyson leaned closer to Noah, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's the matter, Carver? Can't even save your lunch." He tilted the tray, letting Noah's water bottle roll off and hit the floor with a plastic clatter. The laughter from the crowd swelled, a wave of voices egging him on. Gavin grabbed Noah's walker, lifting it just off the ground, making Noah lurch forward in his chair. "Look at this thing," Gavin said, shaking the walker like a toy. "Bet it costs more than my dad's car." The kids nearby roared, some shouting for Gavin to spin it, others filming with their phones, the screens glinting in the cafeteria's bright light. Noah's hands shook, reaching for the table to steady himself, his face burning red but his lips sealed tight. Lila's breath caught. She stood halfway between the counter and Noah's table, her sneakers rooted to the floor. She could feel the eyes of the other cafeteria workers on her, their silence heavy with the unspoken rule, "Stay out of it." Her mind screamed at her to move, to do something, but doubt held her back. She was just a waitress, not a teacher, not a hero. She thought of Mia, her 9-year-old daughter, waiting at home, counting on her to keep this job. Losing it could mean losing everything. But then she saw Noah's shoulders slump, his small frame curling inward as the laughter grew louder, and something inside her snapped. Gavin gave the walker another shake, and Noah's hand shot out, trying to grab it. "Stop," Noah said, his voice quiet but firm, the first word he'd spoken. The crowd hushed for a moment, surprised, then erupted into louder jeers. Tyson smirked, stepping closer. "Oh, he speaks. What's next? You gonna run after it?" He shoved the tray onto the table, knocking over Noah's empty water bottle, and leaned in, his face inches from Noah's. "Go on, tough guy. Stand up and take it." The words were a dare, cruel and cutting, and the crowd ate it up, their laughter echoing off the cafeteria's high ceilings. Lila's hands trembled, her self-defense training kicking in like a reflex. She could see the moves in her head: step in, disarm, control the situation. She'd learned those skills years ago, after too many nights walking home alone, too many moments feeling powerless. But this wasn't a dark alley, this was a school, and these were kids. She glanced at Sophie, the girl sitting nearby, who looked away, her face tight with discomfort but her mouth shut. No one else moved to help. The other students were either laughing or pretending not to see, their phones still recording, the red lights blinking like tiny eyes. Gavin lifted the walker higher, holding it out of Noah's reach, and gave it a mock toss, catching it before it fell. "Bet you'd cry if I dropped this," he said, his grin wide. Noah's eyes flashed with something, anger, maybe, or desperation, and he pushed himself up slightly, his arms shaking from the effort. "Give it back," he said, louder this time, his voice cracking. The crowd laughed harder, and Tyson clapped slowly, his hands loud in the noisy room. "Wow, Carver, big man now. What's next? You gonna fight us?" He nudged Gavin, who dangled the walker higher, taunting Noah to reach for it. Lila's chest burned. She took another step forward, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and loud, drowning out the cafeteria's noise. She thought of Mia again, of the hospital bills, of the late nights studying to give her daughter a better life. But then she saw Noah's face, the way his eyes glistened with unshed tears, the way his hands gripped the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. She knew that look: shame, fear, and the weight of being alone. She'd felt it herself too many times. The crowd's noise grew sharper, their voices blending into a chant. "Do it, Gavin. Drop it," a boy shouted from the back. Others joined in, their words a cruel rhythm. Gavin grinned, tossing the walker from hand to hand, while Tyson leaned over Noah, his voice low and mean. "Your dad's not here to save you, Noah. Nobody is." The words hit Lila like a slap. She knew about Elliot Carver, the billionaire dad who was never around, always buried in his tech empire. She'd heard the whispers about Noah's mom, gone too soon, leaving Noah to face the world alone. The thought made her stomach twist. Lila's feet moved before she could stop them. She crossed the cafeteria, her braids swinging against her back, her apron flapping. The crowd didn't notice her at first, too caught up in the spectacle. Gavin gave the walker another shake, and Noah reached for it again, his arm trembling. "Please," Noah said, his voice barely a whisper now, and that single word broke something in Lila. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clenched, her breath shallow. She could step in, but what then? She wasn't a teacher, wasn't supposed to get involved. The principal, Mrs. Harper, was still nowhere in sight, and the other workers were still ignoring the scene, their heads down. Tyson noticed Lila first, his eyes narrowing as he straightened up. "What's this?" "The lunch lady gonna save you, Carver?" he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. The crowd turned, their laughter shifting to curious murmurs. Gavin lowered the walker slightly, smirking at Lila. "Mind your business, lady," he said, his tone sharp but uncertain. Lila's jaw tightened. She looked at Noah, his eyes meeting hers for a moment, wide and pleading. The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath, the noise fading to a low hum. Lila's mind raced. She could walk away, keep her job, keep her life safe. but Noah's face, small and scared, held her there. She took another step, her voice steady but low, cutting through the tension. "Put it down, Gavin." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that silenced the crowd for a heartbeat. Gavin blinked, caught off guard, and Tyson laughed, stepping toward her. "Or what? You gonna mop us up?" The crowd snickered, but it was weaker now, the energy shifting. Lila didn't move, her eyes locked on Gavin, her body tense but controlled, like a spring ready to snap. Noah's walker still dangled in Gavin's hands, and Noah's breath hitched, his hands gripping the table harder. Lila Brooks stood firm, her green apron slightly askew, her dark braid resting against her shoulder. Her eyes locked onto Gavin Holt, who still held Noah Carver's walker, dangling it like a prize. His face was flushed, his hands gripping the table, his body leaning forward as if he could will the walker back. Tyson Reed smirked beside Gavin, his taunt still echoing. "Or what? You gonna mop us up?" The crowd of students, phones still raised, waited for Lila's next move. Her voice, steady and low, cut through the silence again. "I said put it down." Gavin hesitated, his smirk faltering under Lila's unyielding stare. She took a step closer, her self-defense training guiding her posture, feet planted, shoulders squared, hands loose but ready. She'd learned those moves in a community center years ago, after too many close calls in dark parking lots. Now they felt like second nature. Tyson laughed, but it was nervous, his eyes darting to the crowd for support. "You're just a lunch lady," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier bite. Lila didn't blink. "Last chance," she said, her tone calm but sharp, like a blade held steady. The crowd murmured, some kids lowering their phones, others whispering. Sophie, the girl who'd been watching quietly, stood up, her chair scraping the floor. "Just give it back, Gavin," she said, her voice small but clear. The room shifted, the laughter dying down. Gavin's grip on the walker loosened, but before he could act, Tyson shoved him, egging him on. "Don't listen to her, man. Drop it." Gavin's eyes flicked between Tyson and Lila, uncertainty creeping in. Then, with a defiant sneer, he let the walker fall. It hit the floor with a metallic clatter, the sound echoing in the now quiet cafeteria. Noah flinched, his breath catching. Lila moved fast. She stepped forward, catching the walker before it skidded too far, her movements smooth and controlled. She set it upright beside Noah, her hand brushing his shoulder for a moment, a silent reassurance. Then she turned to Gavin, her voice low but firm. "Pick up his tray. Now." The crowd gasped softly, the tension spiking. Gavin froze, his bravado crumbling under Lila's steady gaze. Tyson stepped forward, his fists clenched, but Lila shifted her stance, her body language a warning. She didn't need to raise her voice, her presence was enough. Before Tyson could act, a sharp voice cut through the room. "What is going on here?" Mrs. Harper, the principal, stood at the cafeteria entrance, her glasses glinting under the lights. The crowd parted, phones dropping to their sides. Lila stepped back, her hands relaxing, but her eyes stayed on Gavin and Tyson. Noah's shoulders eased slightly, his hand reaching for his walker. Mrs. Harper strode forward, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Ms. Brooks, explain this," she said, her tone clipped. Lila met her gaze, unflinching. "They were bullying Noah. I stepped in." Tyson scoffed, but Mrs. Harper silenced him with a look. She turned to Noah, her expression softening. "Are you okay, Noah?" He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Harper's eyes narrowed as she looked at Gavin and Tyson. "Both of you my office. Now." The crowd dispersed, some kids whispering, others slipping their phones away. But Lila knew it was too late. The videos were already out there, spreading across the internet like wildfire. By the time Elliot Carver saw the video, it had thousands of views. He was in his sleek office downtown, surrounded by glass walls and the hum of his tech empire. His phone buzzed, a notification from a local news outlet. The headline read, "Waitress stands up to bullies at elite school." He clicked the link, his heart sinking as he saw Noah, small and hunched, at the center of the chaos. Elliot's jaw tightened, guilt washing over him. He'd been so caught up in work, grieving his wife's loss, that he'd missed how much Noah was struggling. He grabbed his coat and headed for his car, the city blurring past as he drove to Willow Creek. When Elliot arrived, the school was quiet, classes back in session. He found Lila in the cafeteria, wiping down tables, her apron stained from the day's work. Noah sat nearby, his walker beside him, eating a new sandwich. Elliot approached, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. "Ms. Brooks?" he said, his voice soft but commanding. Lila looked up, surprised, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That's me," she said, setting down her rag. Elliot glanced at Noah, then back at her. "I saw the video. You protected my son. I need to know who you are." Lila hesitated, then told him her story, single mom, working to support Mia, scraping by but never giving up. She spoke plainly, her voice steady, no hint of self-pity. Elliot listened, his face unreadable but his eyes softening. He saw Noah watching them, a small smile on his face, the first Elliot had seen in months. "Why'd you do it?" Elliot asked. "You could have lost your job." Lila shrugged, glancing at Noah. "He needed someone. I know what that's like." Elliot didn't say much after that. He left the cafeteria, but the next day, he returned with a plan. He met with Mrs. Harper, demanding changes, anti-bullying programs, sensitivity training, and consequences for Tyson and Gavin. He funded it all, his wealth making it happen overnight. But he didn't stop there. He offered Lila a scholarship for Mia, enough to cover her medical bills and school for years. Lila tried to refuse, her pride kicking in, but Elliot insisted. "You gave my son something I couldn't," he said. "Let me do this." Weeks later, Willow Creek felt different. The hallways were quieter, the whispers gone. Noah walked with his head a little higher, his walker clicking steadily. Sophie started sitting with him at lunch, their conversations shy but growing. Lila kept her job, her apron still green, her braids still loose, but her shoulders were lighter. The video had sparked a change, not just in the school but in the community, with parents and students talking about kindness and standing up. One evening, Lila and Noah sat in the empty cafeteria, sharing a slice of pie from the kitchen. Noah looked at her, his eyes bright. "Thanks, Lila," he said, his voice stronger now. She smiled, ruffling his hair. "Anytime, kid." Outside, the sun set over Willow Creek, the academy's marble walls glowing softly. They didn't need to say more, their quiet moments said it all. That was today's story. If it moved you, hit that like button, share it with a friend who appreciates a powerful twist, and subscribe for more cinematic tales that linger long after the screen fades. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from.